Welcome everybody, and thank you so much for giving up a beautiful summer day. And I'm guessing it's because we all come with the same passion and desire to help our students succeed, right? You will notice this summer a theme that will go across all of our PD, and it's trust, teach, transform. And it is about trusting you as the teacher, the critical decision maker, to teach high-quality instruction and transform our outcomes. In just shy of 2 months, we are going to be welcoming 22,000 students back. And guess what? In that number of 22,000, 60% of them are going to walk into our buildings without a lot of confidence, without a lot of belief in their abilities to succeed, who may not have been successful before, or who question their ability to do well. But with that new year that starts, it's part of why we all love being in education. With that new year that begins, every child walks in that door the first day with some element of hope, right? You see it, they're excited, they've got their new supplies, everything's ready, this might be the year. It's a moment we have to capture and capitalize on. And so what we're going to ask you to do in these 2 days is to think different. We are probably going to challenge some of your innermost belief systems, some of you. If not, we might also celebrate things that you knew, things you learned 20 years ago was good instruction and good practice. We're going to ask you to open your mind and consider thinking differently, to ponder the things that are said. You may feel overwhelmed at time in these 2 days. We're going to be giving you a lot. We don't expect mastery. This isn't 2 days of mastery. What it is just a start. We want to fill your toolbox so that throughout the year you can reflect and come back to this learning, but also we're going to come back together in communities of practice. We hope you'll participate in some of those as you see offered, where we come back together as groups and celebrate what's working, help each other, collaborate, and then discuss challenges along the way. So don't feel as though you need to come out of the 2 days with mastery. Kind of soak it all in. Mark pages, tab things, keep a collection, and kind of process what you're hearing in the next 2 days. So I'm going to tell you a really quick story to see if any of you can identify with this little boy. This is Max. He's adorable. He hasn't come to school yet. He loves his teddy bear. Okay? We're going to pretend for a few moments that Max does not have any barriers to his learning at this point. He does not have the disadvantage that many of our students have. He does not come from poverty. He does not have, I don't know how to say it nicely other than kind of a unique family structure. He's been loved, he's been nurtured, okay? Max carries his teddy bear everywhere. That's Max's teddy bear. We all know kids that carry their favorite toy around, right? So teddy bear can be, put any toy in its place. Because when Max drops his teddy bear and he picks his teddy bear up, what is it? Still a teddy bear, right? Now, that teddy bear might be upside down, or that teddy bear might be backwards, but in Max's small world of maybe 5 years, when he drops something and picks it up, guess what? It's the exact same thing, right? This is his mindset. To Max, this is what reading looked like in his house. He has a family that really loves to share books with him. They read together. See the teddy bear still close. They read, they enjoy stories. We have lots of our students that come to school like this, right? We do. And remember, this is Max without any barriers to his learning. He goes to school, he's excited, he has his new backpack, his new shoes, he's seen other people go to school. This is a big adventure in his life. He is going to school. But something happens when he hits school, it doesn't make sense. See that bee? I kind of gave you a hint of what's coming next. For the first time in Max's life, he sees a bee, it says B. Okay, I got it, B, B, got it. But when you flip that bee over, it's a whole new sound, D, D. Okay, D, D, right? We're going to flip it upside down, backwards, turn it around, now it's a P, P, right? Then we're going to flip it this way, it's a Q, right? Q, Q. And Max is thinking, what? What is this place teaching me, right? Later that same day, the teacher introduces numbers to him. Here's a 9. Oh, good, I got it. What sound does a 9 make? It doesn't make a sound. It represents a quantity of something. A what? Right? Okay, don't forget the 6 looks just like a B, but ever so slightly angled this way. Is it a sound? No, it's a quantity. 9, I got it, it's 9, right? No, it's 6, right? And he's thinking, what? How many of us don't even realize that this is what's happening in the mind of a little one when we're throwing all this stuff at them, right? They're trying to figure this out in a world where they never had this. Doesn't make any sense to them. Here's a little insert here. For some of our students, cursive doesn't do that flippage thing, by the way. Cursive is still important, especially in a student who flips letters a lot. Okay, but then you teach them, all right, now we're going to introduce 2 letters that are stuck together. The P and the H. And when you put them together, P. No, honey. Okay? Do we really wonder why 60% of our children struggle? And year after year, we try to figure out at what point did we lose them? It only gets worse from there, right? If you don't get it, though, we have said over and over again, if you don't get it, we're going to help you. We're going to bring in all our resources. We're going to do everything we can. We can help. Here's the plan, okay? You get 90 minutes in school every day, at least, of literacy instruction, right? But because you're having trouble with the letters that flip and sound, I'm going to add 45 minutes of additional intervention in something that you absolutely hate, right? And then, because you come from a beautiful family with no disadvantaged population type of demographics or characteristics, Mom is going to work with you another 20 minutes every single night. And Mom is serious. We went to Walmart, we went to all the stores, we bought the flashcards, we bought the workbooks, we bought everything. I am going to make this happen. What do you think Max is thinking about this whole learning to read thing? Essentially, it's pulling from every bit of time he has to play with his teddy bear and jump in mud puddles, right? But we're going to do this. We're all coming out. We're going to help you. Full support. The result, all of a sudden, Max starts getting belly aches. Mom's going to start to see some behavior at home. I don't want to do the flashcards anymore, right? He's going to have a fight going to school. I'm not going to school. Nobody understands what the problem is because we've put in all the support in the world. We've helped them. We're doing everything. Everybody is putting forth their best effort to help Max, right? Soon we're going to see attendance as a problem. Mom's thinking, I've never had a problem with Max before. I don't know if it's a bellyache. I'll take him to the doctor, right? Soon we're going to start to see those behaviors transition into school. We don't understand what the problem is. We're all helping. He has everything he needs, right? Sometimes our smartest students start this earlier. Parents, from the view of the parents, some of us are in the room. In kindergarten, parents tell the teacher the first time the teacher says, I'm a little worried about his letters. You know, I'm going to give you a ring of sight words. I'm going to give you some things to do, right? And the parent says, we'll do everything. We'll go buy the workbooks. We'll buy the flashcards. We'll do it all. Grade 1, we're working with him at home. I'm even thinking about getting somebody to help him. I might get a tutor. I might get somebody to help him. Not sure what's going on with Max. In grade 2, they're asking parents, what more can we do? Maybe we should think about testing. Maybe there's a disability. Okay? Grade 3, it starts to change. The parents have tried everything for 3 solid years. Now they might turn and say, what are you doing? And we start to see a shift where parents start thinking, now the school isn't doing what they're supposed to. The school may not be doing the right thing for their son. Grade 4, I give up. My son is just not a reader. You know what? Actually, his dad wasn't a reader either. How many of us have heard that? It's just not in him. He's not going to be a reader. Grade 5, stop suspending him. He wants to be suspended. If we had those conversations, Max will do anything to get out of school. We talked to him about his behaviors. We are just not sure what else to do. Everybody tried. There's not a person in this scenario that didn't give their best effort. And yet we still have students heading into middle school who are still struggling, and we didn't find the point, the exact point when there was a problem. School just isn't his thing. Reverting back to that, remember I told you there were multiple things. Let's think about this again. What makes the K sound? All of those things. It just keeps coming at him, and once we lose that wheel, it's like a rolling ball. It just keeps collecting and collecting. By the older they get, the harder it is for us to figure out where the problem lies. So this is what I'm proposing over the next 2 days, that we stop trying to teach children how to read. You can do a gasp, you can be like, no way, she did not just say that. I did. We need to stop teaching children how to read, because it kills them. It kills the joy, that skill, that drill, that, oh, it's awful. We've got to start teaching children how to be readers. It's a very different approach, a very different mindset. I'm going to teach you what it's like to be a reader. Because we're going to imagine, see this how here? I'm not eliminating the how, okay? But does every child's how really look the same? There isn't one approach that will magically work for every child in your care. That is why it is important that we need you as the critical decision maker to get to know your children, the children as readers, and figure out what their how is and what it will look like for them. Without literacy, we create an equity and access problem. We're going to talk about that over 2 days. Literacy is what you need to get through life. If we don't address this issue for our students, we prevent them from getting to the places they want to go and are perfectly capable of doing. But not being literate puts a bad barrier up for them, right? So let's just imagine this story retold in a different way. Imagine if we gave Max a really great book. Now here's where it's going to get crazy. And we helped him read it. Because if he believes he can, he actually will. It's not my opinion, actually. Lots of research on that, right? The efficacy. They believe they can do something, they'll try. You've seen children try to ride a bike. They want to ride that bike so badly, they'll do anything, right? With the right support, can we get them to ride a bike? Same exact message. They want to read. That is why it's not struggling, it's striving readers. There isn't a kid walking into our schools that doesn't want to read and doesn't want to read well. They just might not believe they can. Because we can teach a child who believes. We cannot teach a child who does not believe that they can learn. All right? We've got to get them believing they can do it. Imagine this conversation instead. Teacher, Max read a book today. Parent, he doesn't know how to read. Teacher, I helped him. Parent, and he read it. Teacher, yes, he's bringing it home. Ask him to read it to you. Here's the funny little line from the teacher back door here that the parents may not know. Would it be okay if you actually gave him some of the words that were in the book that he wants to read? Would it be okay if you actually gave him all the words? Does it matter if he read the book and feels proud of himself? What if we started there? Right? Because you'll hear over and over again, the best intervention in the world is a good book. A great book that they love and they want to read. Even if it means we give them every word in the text. If we get them to believe they can be a reader, now we can start reading them. You would look like a rock star. Right? And that's what we're going for. So next up, this is what I'm thinking. So Max read a book, you gave him all the words. He knows inside his head you gave him all the words, doesn't he? But he's going to celebrate for maybe 2 days before he realizes, yeah, but you really just gave me all those words. Max is not a dumb kid. We have to follow up. Okay, Max, when you read that word, what did you notice? Now can I teach him some of the phonics that helped him read the word he saw? Now I can come a different path, a different road to get at the same hows that we need to get at, but I first got him to believe he could read the word. What do you notice at the beginning of that word, Max, that you read? You see, now you're talking to Max like he's a reader because he already read. Very different. We're asking everybody in here to trust yourselves as the teacher. Trust yourselves to make mistakes, to try things, to get to know your children as readers and figure out what's going to capture them. Finding that perfect book to match. Teach them, right? Trust yourself. Trust the belief that every child has the ability. Teach the child. And you've heard me say it again, not a program. Programs have some wonderful resources, some things in it we can use, but that is not what is going to teach a child to read. It is you, the teacher, okay? We're going to transform the outcome for our students, and that's our goal. these 2 days, and all summer long, okay? We have over 400 people here today. That is a huge celebration. Over 400. If we said that everybody in this room averages 25 students, some less, some more, with the amount of children they're going to impact this year, 25 students, that's 10,000 students this group in this audience reaches this year. 10,000 students. We have 22,000 in our district. That's huge. This year. If you look around the room, this is like an army. This is a huge celebration for us. This is an army of people that can actually change the outcome for 10,000 students this year. That's what we're going to try to do. So there's the motivational yeehaw, get your Southern Baptists on, we can do this, right? It is possible. I'm going to ask, is it possible? Yes. Yeah, that wasn't Southern Baptist at all, by the way. And I'm a New England Catholic, so if I can get into Southern Baptist, so can you. So, is it possible? Yes. We are opening a world of possible. That is why that is the head title of our 2-day workshop. We are opening a world of possible for every reader. All right, so without me talking any further, I would like to introduce you to a national literacy consultant who's been everywhere, held every type of position in the world when it comes to literacy, and she is gracing our presence today, so please welcome Becky Bone.
Okay. Can you hear me okay? See if we can turn the volume 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. Testing 1, 2, 3. Can you hear me okay? Okay, great. I try not to use a handheld mic because then I turn into a cheesy Las Vegas comedian, if you will, when I have a handheld mic. So we're going to spare all of you. So good morning, everyone. Good morning. Wow, what a great group. Monday after a holiday. And can everybody see me okay? I'm going to try to stay on this level. I just got back from vacation on a cruise. Has anyone done a cruise before? I see a few hands, and it was my first time doing a week long. So the whole world right now is kind of at a 10-degree tilt. And if anyone's been on one, you know what I'm talking about. So I thought the ground is much safer than the stage. But I also felt very much at home because when I walked in, I saw all the long lines of people, and I just wanted to go stand in line after a whole week of being preconditioned on a ship. So it's great to be here. It's great to be back on land. I am from Atlanta, Georgia, and so I think your Southern Baptist is a little different than my Southern Baptist. I think yours is a little bit on the mellow side. I like that. But we're really thrilled to be here. I'm here with my Scholastic colleagues, Mary Kay Carlo and Rebecca Danilchek and Jana Briggs. And when we talk about striving readers, and when they talked about your event today, I thought, oh, this is amazing. I get to be one of my heroes. And as you all checked in, it was like Oprah, right? You get a book, you get a book, and you get a book. And that's where it stops. You're not getting any cars, okay? But we know some, at the elementary, all the elementary got the books, and then secondary, you signed up for wanting the book. Now, if you don't have a book, raise your hand, just so I know where you are. You're kind of scattered. Now, if your hand is up, make sure someone within arm's reach does have a book. Because we are going to actually get into the book, because it is a phenomenal book. And I know I've been, as a former teacher and professional developer, you get a book and you're like, oh, okay, and then we never crack it open. But I do have the handout, so, but again, I know we were thinking there was like 220 of you, and there's 400, which is amazing. But that kind of makes it the Hunger Games of handouts, right? How many of you do not have a handout? Raise your hand. Okay, only a few, so make sure if your hand is up, the people around you, at least someone close by. So some of you may need to relocate, and that's okay. So we're going to do a little bit of work in and out of both, and I'm going to make some adjustments knowing that there may be a few of you that don't have either. Okay? So, As we talk about striving and thriving, I always like to start out with Sergio. And I love the opening with the, starting with the young child coming to school and where the challenges are. But I'd also like to present to you an 8th grader who may have some challenges along the way. Now, how many of you do interest inventories with your students in the beginning of the year to kind of get to know them? Okay, great, a lot of hands up. So this is Sergio, and ask what his favorite and least favorite subjects are. We want to know some of the basic information. So English and science is his favorite because it's less work, okay? So he's just keeping it real. It has nothing to do with the content, right? It's a matter of how much work he has to do. But math is his least favorite. It's dumb. He sees no point to it. Now, do we have any math teachers in here? Or math lovers? Only a couple hands of math lovers? Goodness. Okay. But when I asked, do you read for pleasure? He says no. And then if so, what do you read? What does Sergio subtly tell us here? It's not okay, maybe I might read, or sometimes I might read. It is a bona fide no, okay? When asked the best book ever read, what did he put? And I know we've got some inventive spelling here. It's Dr. Seuss. Now, this is an 8th grade young man, and put Dr. Seuss. Why do you think Dr. Seuss he put as his favorite book ever read? Because maybe it was the last one he read, okay? It might be the last one he enjoyed reading, okay? That might be the last pleasurable connection that he had to reading Dr. Seuss. So when we look at Sergio, would you classify him as striving or thriving? That'd be striving with all caps, just like you said no, right? Okay. So when we worked with Sergio and made the right book matches for him, found out some of his passions, and found out books that he liked to read that he could read at his level, and then about halfway through the year, the teacher gave the same interest survey. We wanted to see how he was progressing in his own attitudes. So he likes language arts, still his favorite. He still does not like math. But when he reads for pleasure, what does he read now? He does read for pleasure in magazines. Isn't that a huge step up from no in all capital letters 3 times over? And asked what his favorite book was. It's no longer Dr. Seuss. He wrote, It's the Heart of a Champion. It's a book about baseball, and he read it by choice. Now that's a big change, and that is how we can take and show striving to thriving, because with our elementary students, when they come and they start to struggle, they still, a lot of times, they're quick, their attitudes are, okay, we can turn them around a little faster. But how many of you work with middle school students? God bless you, right? Okay, and all their hormonal differences. Middle schoolers take a little longer to flip the switch, right? If they have been hardened like Sergio, you've really got to get in and get into the attitude as well, not just the skills. And then how many of you work with high school? Show of hands. Okay, and they take a little bit longer than even flipping middle schoolers. But thriving is very possible. So when we think about striving and thriving, I want you to figure and really reflect on your definition. Now this is in the handout, I believe, page 1 of the handout. So if you don't have that, you can just jot down these questions or snap a picture. But I want each of you to take a minute or so to quietly reflect on how you define reading, and I want you to think about your students this past year. Now I know how many of you are like, man, I just got them out of my head, Becky. Thank you so much for bringing a couple of them front and center, all right? But I want you to think about your students of past year, or the students in your building if you're at the administrative level, or the students in your community if you're at the community level. Who are those thriving readers in your class or school? And how do you know they are thriving, and what makes them thrive? And then the last question, what do you need to do to ensure that all readers and all the students are thriving, okay? So I'll give you about, 2 minutes and 12 seconds, give or take a second. And let you quietly reflect and write on your handout or write in the notes on your smart device if you don't have the handout. And then we'll pull back together. So let me set the timer on my phone. And again, worst case, you can type in your notes on your smart device. Because I know you all brought something to write with, right? She says with a sarcastic smile. All right. Okay. So if you'll take a few minutes just to personally, quietly reflect on your own. Think of your own kids, your students. And if you support at the building level, think about maybe a particular grade or a particular class. Or you can think of the building as a whole. Who are the thrivers? You can name them. How do you know they're thriving? Got about 30 seconds left, give or take. Okay, you'll finish up the thought you're writing. And then what I'd like you to do is take a look to your left. And does that look someone trustworthy? If you don't have anyone to your left, look to your right. Does it look like someone who you could possibly, divulge your teaching secrets for the next, 75 minutes we're together? If they don't look trustworthy or they're still asleep, then look your other direction and make that your shoulder partner. Try not to hurt the other person's feelings. You may have to look in front or behind, but just choose a shoulder partner unless there's like 3 of you isolated, then you can do a trio, but make it no larger than a trio. And talk about a couple of questions, at least the first 2, about who your thrivers are and how you know they are that way. And I'll give you about 1 minute and 47 seconds to share, so each of you get a chance to talk about how you answer a few of those questions.
First grade was 2 rounds, and then some grades like second,
more copies, so if you don't have a handout, those are coming soon. So how do you know who the Thrivers are? What were a couple things that you and your partner talked about? What do they look like? Yes, ma'am.
They have a lot to say about what they want to read. They like to talk about what they want to read.
Okay, they like to talk about what they read, and they have a lot to say about it. Okay, what else? Yes?
They were choosing to read on their own.
Oh, yes, choosing to read on their own. Huge. Yes? Okay, they've always got a next book in mind.
While they're reading, regard themselves or responding.
Okay. They're responding emotionally to what they're reading on their own, not on display. They're just doing that naturally. Okay? One other? Now, are we talking skills or are we talking behaviors here or attitudes? A lot of time we're talking the attitudes, okay? But that's how we can spot them really easily. What is making them thrive? Lots of books, okay? And lots of real books, right? Books with characters, like at the elementary level, Dog Man. Oh my gosh, okay? Nobody, Dave Pilkey is probably one of the best authors for hooking kids into reading, okay? Yes, ma'am?
When they felt successful, they wanted to thrive.
Okay, they have that feeling of success, they want to thrive even more, and one success builds on the next, okay? What, did you get a chance to talk about number 4? What are some of the things that you've done or that we need to do to ensure that all kids are thriving? And I think she kind of talked about it in the beginning. I think that was such a great intro to talk about that. Yes?
I'm thinking that when we're setting up for experiences, we're sometimes giving them most of the sentence and stopping when we get to a word that we know they can fill in from even their own experiences and kind of figure it out on their own, giving them that success and feeling like they read that word.
Okay, giving them that success and let them feel that they've read that word. And how many of you are familiar with the gradual release of responsibility? Okay, and that's balanced literacy. That is at the highest level gradual release. That's why we have read aloud, because we're doing the decoding for them. So no matter where they are on the spectrum, everyone is listening. They don't have to read the text. And then shared reading, we're still doing the decoding, but they see the print. iPass print with voice support. That continues to help them feel successful. And then in guided reading, now the text is at their instructional level. Now they're doing the reading, but the teacher's there to coach and support them in small group. And then all of that supports them as we turn them over to independent reading, text at their own independent level. And so that gradual release of responsibility and what we do as teachers and what we do with the level of text is all part of how we can help all readers thrive, if you will. So looking at that, what we're going to do is look at what our strivers need, because a lot of times, and Pam Allen tomorrow, your keynote, will kind of talk about, looking through the deficit or looking through the strength lens. And so when we look at what all strivers need, and we look at the things that matter for our thriving readers, and this is page 35 in the book, so if you don't have a book, you can just jot that page number down and come back to it. But I want to have you, that way if you want to put a flag on it or dog ear it. But look at number 1, engage in community building. Now, how many of you do community building the first week or the first few days? And then you get into the, oh my gosh, I've got standards, let's go, okay? And that is, I know the educator side of us and the standards and the looming assessments and the SOLs, all of that good stuff, it kind of pulls in there. But the community building is critical to help our strivers and to continue to grow our thrivers. And we want them to read extensively. They have to be able to read text, but they want to read, we need to give them text they want to read and they can read. And look at bullet number 3. Build in time for them to read how often? Every day. Every day. Because a lot of your students, when they go home, are they reading every night? Do they have the resources? Do they have the skills? Do they have the books and the time and the quiet and the time? They probably don't. We want to give them a lot of entry points, give them a repertoire of comprehension strategies, meet with them in conferences. Doesn't matter if they're elementary, middle, or high. Conferring with kids that one-on-one time is critical. And actually that conferring time is what made a huge difference with Sergio, besides the book, making the right meet with him. And then teach with flexible, temporary small groups to meet their needs. And this is what strivers need. And Steph Harvey and Andy Ward, the authors of the book, you know, how many of you have read Steph Harvey's other books, Strategies That Work? I mean, she's an incredibly accomplished author. And I always feel honored when you can't get Steph Harvey, then you get me. It's like, but actually it's easier than having to go the day after Steph Harvey goes, right? That's even more challenging. But, you know, in their years of experience in writing this book, From Striving to Thriving, they said these are the hallmarks of what our strivers need. Now, I like to break it down because I'm the educator. I'm like, okay, let's put these theories into practice. Now, I truly believe that teaching striving readers is a lot like fishing. Now, do we have any fishermen or women out there? Or folks that used to before you began teaching and don't have any free time, right? Okay. But I truly believe this. And sometimes people will look at this slide and go, wow, Becky, that's a great way to get a gratuitous photo of you holding that 40-pound king salmon that you caught and landed yourself in Alaska several vacations ago. And I say, you know what, that's not a gratuitous photo, because if I were going to do a gratuitous photo, I might do this, you know, shameless picture on a cruise. I might do a gratuitous photo with my youngest niece graduating from high school with the honors last year. And if I were going to do gratuitous photos, then I might get really gratuitous and put the fur babies up there. This is Kate Spade Purbury, by the way. And she is still mourning the loss of her namesake, by the way. And then I might just get absolutely shameless and put Mr. Katsu up there with all his business hanging out. He really needs to relax more. So the picture of me with the 40-pound king salmon is not a gratuitous photo, because I truly believe teaching striver readers is a lot like fishing. And it's because of one of my favorite quotes in the world by Gregory and Chapman. And they say, you got to bait the hook with what the fish like, not what the fisherman likes. And as educators, I think that is such a simple but important mantra. We have to remind ourselves all the time. And I saw this firsthand, the first fishing trip my dad and I took up to Alaska. Now, I was pretty much not born, but raised in Florida. And as you know, Florida is surrounded by water. And my mom and dad were huge fishermen. And, I mean, some of my youngest memories are, you know, the weekend, we're just on the boat the whole time. But, you know, my dad did deep sea fishing, he did lake fishing, he did canal, and, you know, all sorts of water, fresh water, salt water, all of that. But when we went to Alaska, it was a very different kind of fishing. And has anybody fished in Alaska before? Or heard stories about it? Okay. So when we normally fish, we bait the hook. And so we had our guide and we were out on the boat. And he's like, okay, so here you go. All you have to do is cast. And, you know, we looked at and we're like, okay, there's no bait on the hook. And I'm like, Dad, there's no bait on the hook. And he's like, so we just cast out with this? He's like, yeah. And we're like, okay, we may be from Florida and Georgia, but, you know, we know you got to put bait on a hook to catch a fish, right? And the guide's like, no, just put it out there. Now, he's not an educator. He wasn't about to explain why. But, you know, the engineer of my father, the big fisherman, is like, excuse me, sir, but there's no bait on the hook. How are we going to catch a fish? Well, there's a weight on there. It'll take it to the bottom of the stream and you'll catch it. And again, we're like, okay, no, we have some serious cognitive dissonance going on here. And so we're like, okay, so why isn't there bait on the hook? He's like, because you don't need it. He's like, you see that fuzzy, you know, fluorescent green on it? We're like, yeah. He's like, that'll get the fish. And we're like, okay, that's not anywhere near the bait, the hook. We don't understand. So what we finally, 15 minutes later, were able to pull out of the fishing guide is that where we were fishing in that river, by the point, the salmon were pretty close to spawning. And at that point, they stopped eating. He says, so you don't put bait on the hook because they're not going to eat. He says, but you get that really fluorescent colored cottony stuff, that's going to irritate them enough to where they're going to bite at it. And that's when you fill them and you snag them with the hook. And we're like, oh, okay, this is a completely different way of fishing. Now, if we would have bait the hook with what the fishermen were used to, if we would have put bait on, we never would have caught anything. And so it really was a real fishing reminder of that. But think about your students. And have there been times where maybe you baited the hook with something the fish didn't like? Like it was a book, you're like, oh, they're gonna love it, it's a read aloud. And then it's like crickets chirping and the kids are like so not into it, okay? You know, they spit the hook out if they don't like what the bait is on it. Sometimes we do it because that's all we have, those are the resources we have. And sometimes we do it under the guise of that this is the standard. This is what you're being assessed on, right? And so we need to make sure. But we have to bait the hook with what they like all throughout the year. That's how we hook them. And then as they get better and stronger and they really start to thrive, then that's when they can power through those longer, more boring passages, if you will. I mean, I don't know, maybe your state assessment, the passages are really exciting and engaging than they are in Florida and Georgia and the other parts of the country. I can tell from your laughter that's not the case. Okay. So what we're going to do in our short time together this morning is kind of talk about some key concepts in the book. We're going to power through some of the, as an introductory, if you will. We're going to look at how to table the labels and how we can use personalized assessments, and then how we can make sure kids are reading voluminously. And these are kind of the three top messages I think that Steph always tries to kick off with. So let's talk about first, when we're talking about striving and thriving, tabling the labels. Now this page 38, if you want, again, if you don't have the book, just jot down page 38. But this is where it starts in your book, is what we can do to grow confident, capable readers. And we have these 5 pieces where we have to let go of labeling kids. We've got to champion a true growth mindset. We have to encourage empathy. We've got to really get to know the kids ASAP and create conditions for interaction and boundless reading. So we're going to touch on these next. And again, that's page 38. And I tell you, Steph Harvey, she's like rabid when it gets to this. She's like, enough with the labels. She says, beliefs drive language and language drives practice. What we believe, say, and do matters. So what she says, it's not about reading abilities, it's about reading behaviors. And she says, levels are a tool for teachers to use, not a label. Now, I'm very fortunate that I get to work nationwide, and I walk through a lot of schools. And every time I walk through classrooms, I sit and talk with the kids. And if they're reading independently, I ask them, what are you reading? What is this? And a lot of the times, the kids won't say, oh, this is a level G book. They say, I'm a level G. And I'm like, okay, that's what your level, but what are you reading? I'm a level G. Like they've been labeled, they're the level they read. Not, I'm a reader, and this is a level G book, and I've selected this. It's a little easy for me to read right now, but I just finished 2 really challenging books, and I just needed Dave Pilkey for my next book. And I have encountered kids that say that, but most of the time they focus on the level, and we have to make sure they know that a level is not a label, okay? It's a tool, it's a support. Levels are important, okay, but it's not a label, and Steph Harvey is adamant about that. So think about what good instruction is. It's not about the levels, it's about behaviors, attitudes, and understanding, because reading is a very complex process, and it involves so many aspects. And because of that, that's why she created the spectrum of thriving readers, the behaviors, attitudes, and understanding. This is a critical page in the book, page 24, and I know at the secondary table, they also handed out a single sheet of this information, of this chart, if you will, okay? So if you didn't have the book in your secondary, you should at least have this single page. Are any of you familiar with Fountas and Pinnell's literacy continuum? Okay, great. And that big tome, that, the 500 pages of the reading behaviors by each of the guided reading levels A through Z through the Fountas and Pinnell leveling system. And so Steph Harvey and Annie Ward, when they started looking at that, they said, yes, but when we're looking at striving readers, we need to make sure we're looking at the attitudes and behaviors as well, okay? So when we're looking at helping striving readers, we've got to make sure all of this is taken to an account. So you'll see on page 24, you'll see some similarities to F&Ps, but what differences do you notice? Like we see knowledge acquisition, comprehension, genre and format, that's pretty similar. But notice text selection and specific behaviors around how to choose text. And look at volume. We don't necessarily see that, and this is critical as a part of the behaviors and the practice, that they're developing their identity as a reader and building empathy. And you look at language and surface structure. So as we take a look at these, I want to give you a couple minutes to look through, and then to reflect on these. Let me get that back up here. How do these go beyond just a reading level? And which of these do your kids need more or less support on? So think about your strivers, but also think of your thrivers, because Steph Harvey also says, if you look at this whole spectrum, do you have one student that has got all of this wrapped up? She says no. She says there's going to be kids that we call thriving readers. They may be thriving in fiction, but they're more striving in nonfiction. We have some students that may be thriving with fluency, but they're striving with comprehension in certain genres. And she says that's a thing we need to keep in mind, is that all thrivers have areas. Like, how many of you have ever had a child that refuses to read science fiction or fantasy because it's just, especially sci-fi, it's too much out of their realm, okay? So that's a striving reader when it comes to that genre. Or how many of you have the fiction readers that just will not take that bridge into nonfiction? Or, I love your pre-engineers, that they love nonfiction, they love everything linear, sequential, and then you give them a poem, and they would rather pull their teeth out than figure out how to interpret that poem and what it means, right? And how many of you with our younger readers, when it's straightforward, they're good, but then the whole inferring and reading between the lines, they're like, what do you mean? It's not here. I don't understand it when we get to those higher level skills. So all kids are going to be striving in some areas. So I'm going to give you a couple minutes to read through this, either in your book or in the hand on the single sheet that you got, and reflect on those areas. And as you look through, if you want to chat up your shoulder partner, I hope they worked out for you the first turn and talk. If not, then turn in the other direction and switch. Or tell them they need to get their caffeine going faster, if you like. And take a minute to read through these and reflect on those. And I'll give you about a minute and 51 seconds, if you will, give or take. All right, if I can get you back in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Fabulous. You know you're with educators. You start hearing the countdown. You're like, oh, I don't know what it's for, but I got to get quiet, right? All right, so did you notice some differences in how this goes beyond the level? Okay? And whether you're elementary, middle, or high school, don't these apply? They really do. Some you might adapt a little bit, or you might add some on there. But this spectrum is really critical as we look at from striving to thriving. Which did you find that more of your kids need more support with and help around? Were there any commonalities between you and your partner, or did it vary based on your kids? Okay. We're seeing some, you saw some commonalities through there. How many of you, even though it's not labeled, you see your standards interwoven in the language of your standards in here? Okay, big time, all right? So these are the behaviors, the understandings, as well as the attitudes. We've got to make sure we're addressing all of those. So one of the ways that we do this is by looking at how to, okay, where'd my whole A section go? Okay. How we can support them. Now, one of the ways that we look at that is by champion a growth mindset. Okay, there was an A before that, but I think that slide got hidden, so sorry about that. Now, when we are working with our kids, we're looking at the behaviors. We have to look at growth mindset. How many of you are very familiar with Carol Dweck's work of growth mindset? Okay, I see some hands up. One of the things that she talks about is that we have to not just praise the effort, but look at the strategies, okay? And really do that, because they, a lot of times when they feel like they can make a change, like she talked about in the intro, that they know they can make a difference. And how many of you have heard kids say, well, I'm just not smart. That's just not me. I'm not a good reader. I'm not a good writer, okay? And so Carol Dweck talks about we have to praise not the effort, but the strategy, so they know to find another strategy. And I learned this lesson the hard way. About 5 years ago, I ended up getting custody of my youngest niece and nephew, and they were 14 and 16 at the time. And so, they came to me not, in the best academic condition. And of course, they were like, oh my gosh, why did you have to be a former ELA teacher, Aunt Becky? Everything becomes a teachable moment and we can't get away with anything. And I'm like, yes, I never had kids, but I was a teacher, so I'm actually gonna be on you even more. But the thing was with Rebecca, my youngest niece, is she was always like, well, I'm not smart, I'm not a good reader. That was kind of her constant mantra. She says, I'm not smart. And I'm like, there's a lot of different smarts. And when I taught, a lot of times my smartest kids weren't the ones with the highest IQ. They were the ones that worked the hardest and really dug in and knew different ways to try things. And so it literally took 4 years of working against what she always says is, I'm dumb, I'm not smart. Now, she had that because I know my older sister, and I know that's my sister, her mother's mantra. And so I know she got a lot of that from there, but when she got accepted to college and started college, she kind of fell back into that I'm not smart. And I'm like, you know, Becca, you have to work 2 or 3 times harder than some of the people sitting in a class next to you. But again, it comes down to work ethic and having your strategies and not what your IQ on the page is. And so she's kind of slid back a little bit her first year in college, but we're still building and working that up. But part of it is because she's majored in her boyfriend her first year. You know, but that's a whole other workshop. And how many of you are parents of children who go to college and they major in the significant other as well? Yeah. First boyfriend. I was hoping we could get out of high school without that, and we didn't, but now she's just like come apart totally because of the boyfriend. But that's okay. So Carol Dweck talks about how important it is. And so here's some examples on page 45. Look at those for a second and think, how different are those from some of the prompts you give kids? I love that first one. What did you do today to become a better reader today? How did that reading make you more knowledgeable? What do you need to help you grow more knowledgeable? And look at the last one. How do you plan to keep learning more about this? Because I think sometimes, especially when we're looking at intermediate and middle and higher, we're all prompting about the text itself, right? The book or the text. But it may not be about what are we doing that you can apply to the next text. And so these are the growth mindset prompts that we can focus on with the kids and to help build that growth mindset. So I love the whole concept of growth mindset, but what I love, especially what Steph Harvey's done in the book, is said, okay, what does it look like in ELA, specifically to help them strive and become thriving? And then I don't know how many of you have seen this video, Angela Duckworth. We are having some technical difficulties, so we're not going to show it this morning. But just YouTube Angela Duckworth Grit on her TED Talk. And it is a fabulous 6-minute video that she too talks about the Carol Dweck's work on mindset and growth and that growth mindset. And she says, and all the research that she's done, because she's a former educator, it doesn't come down to IQ. The number one thing that makes a difference in students succeeding is their grit, is their perseverance, and how hard they work and how they know that failure's okay because they get another chance, another way to figure it out. That failing does not mean the end of everything. And so she totally believes in Carol Dweck's work around that mindset. And I know you'll get a lot of this also when Pam Allen talks tomorrow. And that leads into how important it is to encourage empathy. And how many of you have focused on social emotional learning or been hearing a lot about that lately and how critical that is? I tell you, every time we turn on the TV and there's another shooting, a school shooting or a business shooting, you know, just there's, it just, every time it breaks my heart. But I think now more than ever, it's critical that we are teaching and getting kids to read about empathy. And I'm not going to go into detail on this because you're definitely going to get a lot of this from Pam Allen and some of you that are implementing Lit Camp. But her 7 strengths in her book, Every Child a Super Reader. And she has great text selections that go along with it and how we can use our literature to really hit on these 7 strengths. So if you want to just snap a picture of this, but Pam will definitely talk more about her work tomorrow. Now, number D is how important it is to get to know your kids and really get to know your kids ASAP. And pages 55 through 61 talk about this. And these are just kind of a snapshot of some great ideas. And you're probably going to see some that you already do. And then you might see a few that you're like, ooh, haven't thought about that. So it talks about interest inventories, spotlighting important books, creating textual lineage, creating identity webs. I love the choose walk-up songs. Any of you have done that before? And think about how you can turn that into a literacy-based event. to help kids all feel successful, whether they're striving or thriving. And how to select whole class read-alouds to build community, especially early on, and then maintain it. And I love that it's summertime because you can read through these and think, okay, these are some of the things I already do, but I might change up a couple things that I do, and I might spread these out a little bit more than just in the beginning of the year. So we talked earlier about interest surveys, and I just put one example on the screen. I didn't put any of the handout because you can just Google interest inventories, and a bazillion will come up, let alone on Scholastic's website. And then how many of you are Pinterest, and you find the Martha Stewart of the interest inventories, of course. But there's a lot of different interest inventories, and you got to think about how you can uncover not just their attitudes, but their behaviors and the strategies they have in their interest inventory. So we can check off, what books do you like to read? But what if they are a striving reader? What do they usually do there? They leave it blank, because guess what? They don't like to read, right? So then we're like, okay, how do you spend your free time? What do you like to do? What video games do you like to play? What TV shows? Okay, so that kind of helps us find their interests. But what other questions are we putting on there to discover their attitude? And you saw that in the sample that we saw in part of the interest inventory with Sergio. But their behaviors, how frequently do they read? How frequently do they not? So in this interest survey, this is a compilation, and this is in the handout. So by now I've heard all people have a handout, correct? Does anyone not have a handout? Raise your hand. We have just a few. They have made more handouts, and then I think there's a couple. So can I ask you to stand up from the front? Thank you. These are Mr. Oprah elf, if you will, to keep in the Oprah. And then we've heard, I think everybody's got a book now, or just about. If you still need a handout, raise your hand, because you're definitely going to need a handout for this activity. Anybody? One more over here. Thank you. Now, in the beginning of the year, we do a lot with our kids, and we have a lot of paperwork. And let's be honest, how many of you do the interest surveys, and then you look through them, and they kind of get shelved or filed away, right? And then you're, kind of coming back to them. So what I want you to do is, this is a way to compile the interest inventories to help you more easily make them actionable. Now, we're looking at one that's a grade 2. So if you are an intermediate or middle or higher teacher, then you'll just have to pretend, that you can adapt this for your own kids. But I want you to go through the activity itself. So with that lovely shoulder partner you have, take through and look at analyzing this class, this reading and interest survey. So when you look at it, at the beginning of the year, what do you learn quickly about the kids? But how might this impact your next getting to know you steps? Also, how might this impact your independent reading conferences with the kids? And how might it impact that small group instruction, the strategy group or the guided reading, whatever structures you use for small group, okay? So over to the far right, you will see the F&P, Fountas and Pinnell guided reading levels. If you're secondary and you're not familiar with them, they're reading levels that go A through Z. A is the basic level, beginning text. Z is the highest level, and there are correlation charts online. If you are correlating and you know Lexiles more, you can see kind of what that correlation is. But I wanted, with your shoulder partner, give you a couple minutes to take a look and see, okay, what do we learn quick? And how would this impact our next steps if this was our class? Any questions? All right, I'm going to give you about 2 minutes and 47 seconds this time. Give or take a second.
I think I would just be more context than her be interested in that would go out and have a conversation. I don't know if he's still alive that. You can do it. Fine, not doing the camera. I'm just gonna leave. Just throw me my purse and yeah, you're gonna have to step on this. I can hold this down. You got it.
All right, if you'll take 20 seconds longer and finish up. Okay. Get you back. Excellent. All right, now I know you probably could have taken another 5 minutes analyzing the data. How many of you are like, oh, data, I love this? You're like digging in. And how many of you are like, it is July, hello. So when you look at this, how might this impact your next steps for getting to know your kids at the beginning of the year? What was something you and your partner talked about? What might your next step be? Yes? Okay. 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 Absolutely. So the first thing is inventory your classroom library to make sure you've got text, both print and digital, that cover all the areas that you're interested in. Okay? Anything else you talked about for next steps? Yes? Okay. Right, and making sure they've got books, whether you've got books they can check out or from the media center, whatever it is, or send home books to do that. Okay? How might this inform your independent reading conferences? Mm-hmm. Okay, having book stacks that are correlated to what they have, and that you actually have that stack when you confer with them. Absolutely. So they can see, oh, you like animals? Well, guess what? Look at all of these books. It's not just one or two. And if you pull your library and it's only one or two, then you go to the media center and make sure you've got more that are deep. Okay? Now, when you looked at this, how many of you looked to the far right column and you just started working on how you were going to set up your small groups or your guided reading groups based on their reading level? Okay? And that's an easy way to go, but we've got to make sure, because there's some incongruencies here where we have kids who like to read, but they're not reading at home. And what's really interesting is, did you see any patterns with some of the kids who don't like to read? What were some of the things they did like? Okay, they definitely liked the comics. What else? The what? Magazines. Okay, so now we're starting to see it may not be traditional print books, but it may be magazines. It may be more nonfiction that they go into. And so this is something, again, we could pair up with our media specialists and say, okay, here are my kids. Like if you're middle school, you'd have to compile all classes, like do one per class and then do a total compilation. But this is where we have some gaps because I want to make sure I've got a good book stack, especially for the striving readers who may not be attitude thinking about it. Now, another thing we can do to get to know our kids is what Ephraim Tatum calls doing a textual lineage. I don't know if any of you are familiar with his work, but what he talks about is how we can demonstrate as the lead reader in our class how important that our history, our reading history is, if you will. And this is in your handouts, kind of a version of it. And so in the beginning, as we get to know our kids, we show them how important text has been in our lives. So a textual lineage isn't just our favorite books. It's books that have really made an impact on our lives. So my super fast textual lineage is I start with Dr. Seuss, similar to Sergio, but because that was the first book I read. And I remember the day, I was 5 years old, it was a Saturday morning, and that really unlocked literacy for me because my house was the type of house where my dad read so much you couldn't walk anywhere without tripping over books and Reader's Digest and magazines. They were everywhere. Now, then my textual lineage goes to literature with a capital L for Nancy Drew. But that series book was huge for me when I was 9. And Dr. Tatum talks about how important it is that kids have kind of a lighthouse book, if you will, a book, a text that helps show the way. It's like a roadmap book, if you will. And what I didn't realize at the time when I was reading Nancy Drew, that Nancy Drew was a roadmap book for me, because when I was reading the series and that summer when I was 9, I really related to Nancy Drew because, like her, my mother died and I was being raised by my dad. And I really liked Nancy Drew because she didn't have one best friend, she had 2 best friends, which as a 9-year-old girl, that's really important. And she had a very, very cool car. She had a convertible, and I always wanted a convertible. I think it goes back to my Nancy Drew roots. But most importantly, she had a hot boyfriend named Ned, okay? So let's just get down to it. I know I was a little advanced for a 9-year-old, but yeah, we can see where Becca, my niece, is running off there. But Nancy Drew was a roadmap book for me because I could see parallels with her and me. I just didn't realize it at the time. And of course, you can imagine a younger girl in my situation, and ladies, you understand Judy Bloom's Are You There, God, It's Me, Margaret, how important that was. But Reader's Digest was huge because that was what my dad and I read in common that we could talk about. And then as I got older, how important I loved Ernest Hemingway, and Langston Hughes was kind of a roadmap book for me as a teacher because I had an African American literature class in college and read all these great poets and writers of the Harlem Renaissance, and that's when I said to myself, why didn't I read these authors when I was in school? And that's when I really made that determination to become an educator and make sure that my kids had access to all great writers, not just the ones that might be published in the book, the textbook, or the program that I had in front of me. So when you think about your textual lineages, think about those roadmap texts. What books have really made a difference? And as you think about what text might be a part of your textual lineage that you model for your students. When I've done this with other faculties or districts, it's been amazing to then walk through the classrooms and see that, the teachers have their textual lineages posted, that the custodian has his textual lineage posted, that the lunchroom manager has hers posted, and that the principal and AP have theirs posted. So just real quick, what would be a couple texts that might be the beginning of your textual lineage? You'll need to go back when you have more time this summer and flesh that out. But what would a couple texts be on your textual lineage? Not just favorites, but that have made an impact. You can jot them down on your sheet, or you can turn and talk to your neighbor. What would a couple of those be? You can think back to your childhood, from your teaching career, from grad school or undergrad, college, all that. Deep into the past and went to an early child book, a beloved one. How many of you talked about a series book? Okay. How many of you talked about the Bible as a tones text in yours? How many of you talked about a poem? Because it could be song lyrics, it can be a poem, it can be non-traditional text. But how many of you thinking, okay, this is definitely something we can model as a faculty, so they see all of our textual lineages are so different. And let's say you're thinking, okay, but my striving readers, they're like, I don't like to read, so I don't have anything on there, right? So what do we say? Well, okay, that's my challenge. I'm going to make sure by the end of the year that you're going to have text on your textual lineage. So it may be coming from read-alouds or shared readings until they're really becoming thriving at independent reading. Now, the other piece to think about, what I was just talking about, is how then we can use the read-alouds to build communities. Steph Harvey talks about it in her book, but Lester Laminack, have any of you ever heard him or read any of his professional books or the children's book he's read? He calls best friends books, BFBs, are now the new BFFs. And so he says we've got to have best friend books for read-alouds, and a lot of times it is about building community. And I don't know if any of you have seen or read the new one, The Koala Who Could. If you are elementary, you could probably even use it at the middle school level, jot that title down. It is a phenomenal read-aloud about a koala bear that just likes to stay in his tree and won't come down and play with everybody else because he doesn't like to do anything that's different. And how many of you are thinking, boy, that's summing up a lot of my kids when I get them in the beginning of the year. And then due to circumstances beyond his control, of course, he ends up on the ground, but realizes it's not so bad down there. So that would be how you can utilize that as a community builder. At the secondary level, you don't have to do a whole book as a read-out. You could do a section of. This is from Sherman and Alexi's The Absolute True Diary of a Part-Time Indian. And I would say you could do part of this as a read-aloud because there's definitely some parts in the book that at the middle school level could be sensory issues. But I love this section on here, and it talks about on expectations. He says, back on the res, I was a decent player playing basketball. But when something magical happened to me when I went to Reardon, the non-Indian reservation school, overnight I became a good player. I suppose it had something to do with confidence. I mean, I'd always been the lowest Indian on the reservation totem pole. I wasn't expected to be good, so I wasn't. But in Reardon, my coach and the other players wanted me to be good. They needed me to be good. They expected me to be good. And so I became good. I wanted to live up to expectations. And as they expected more of me, I expected more of myself. So you can take just one section of the book as that community builder read-aloud. But read-aloud really helps and continues. And you'll hear a lot more about that with Pam Allen tomorrow. The other thing to think about is establishing collaborative spaces. Think about your classroom. Do kids have a place to work in pairs? Do they have a place to work in group? Do they have a place where you can do your whole group read aloud? And I know that looks very different at the elementary and the middle and the high school level. But page 66 starts that section in her book to think about where we can be reflective about how to set that up for striving readers, if you will. And again, if you just want to put a tab on that or mark page 66, and it's that whole section on the environment. So we've talked about building that foundation for striving readers. Now, what about assessment and how to personalize and use that assessment formatively, if you will? Now, pages 21 to 23 is where the authors talk about how important that reading drives teaching and assessment. And you'll see these bullets on pages 21 through 23. Talks about the importance of keeping reading instruction and practice embedded in real, authentic text, and how to make sure the curriculum is the richest as possible, and making sure that the best teaching is that responsive teaching, that we're looking at the data, we're looking at what they're doing, not just skill, but behavior and attitude-wise, and how we have to make sure that the assessment, look at it through an inquiry lens, if you will. So one of the things, and we're not going to have time to go into it, but make a note of page 202 in particular, where they talk about the importance of authentic text. And it talks about the difference between authentic text and contrived text, as you will, and decodable text, and what the differences are, and why it's so critical that striving readers have access to authentic text. So if you are using decodable text for a purpose, you have to make sure that they're also getting that authentic text in their read aloud, their shared reading, and in their independent reading as well. Because they say that one area where striving readers, a lot of times they're the kids least exposed to the rich language of authentic text. And that's where they get the most vocabulary growth from. So that little sidebar on page 202 is really important to come back to and to read about that. And Steph Harvey, they introduced kind of a new concept about assessing readers in the round. And in your book, it's what we call the gatefold, inside the front cover. If you open that up, you'll see the assessing readers in the round. And, oh, here are my glasses. Can't see anything without them. So when you go through and think about, they're targeting the 4 principles of reading. It's a personal process, it's social and cultural, it's a thinking process, and a language process. And so it has the behaviors and the attitudes and the understandings from the spectrum to the left. And then the second column is what to look for and listen as you kid watch and confer. And if you look through that, if you just skim through that, you'll think about, okay, if I've got this photocopied, I've got it on my clipboard, or I've got it on my iPad when I'm conferring with kids or in small group, these are some great look-fors and even some prompts that we can look at and to help support our striving readers. So it's the gatefold, and sometimes it's easy to overlook, but the whole concept of assessing reader in the round is making sure that we're setting goals, that we're working with the kids. And so in each section of the book, they take it deeper, and they provide questions for self, meaning you, the teacher. They've got kid watching questions when you're observing kids, and then conferring questions. So a real specific example you'll find on page 69. Now, if we look at, in this case, this is tabling the labels, which we've spent a lot of time on this morning. So this is the table of the labels, assessing readers in the round here. So on page 69, you're going to see a lot of self-questions for you. Like, do I believe that striving readers can become avid, proficient readers? What are some ways I can build confidence in my striving readers? But then you'll see the kid watching questions. Does the student believe he can become a good reader? That's half the battle there. And then conferring questions. Do you want to try that again? What will you do differently in the next attempt? This is really getting at their behavior and their strategies that they're using. So these are great to have on clipboards or have them scanned in or in your, on your iPad or your smart device. And this book has a lot of resources online that you can download and pull these up, as well as these single pages of assessing readers in the round. And so the responsive part of the teaching is what we're doing, not just whole group, but small group and individually one-on-one when we're conferring with the kids. So whether it's guided reading that we're doing, or whether it's small group instruction that we're doing. One other page that you'll definitely want to make note is page 26. This comprehension continuum is phenomenal. Love, love, love this work. So if we look at the comprehension continuum, page 26, what this does is shows us, okay, if they're answering literal questions and being able to retell the who, what, notice that they're not necessarily demonstrating deeper level comprehension. At what stage of the questioning is it where we're really seeing that they are comprehending? When they're merging the thinking with the content. That's where they apply, where they can take the who, what, when, where, and apply it with the inferring, with the reading between the lines. That's where understanding truly begins. So when you're looking at the questions you're asking, whether it's in whole group or small group, we need to make sure it's not that we don't do the first two. Those two are the foundation, but we've got to make sure we're hitting the final three columns, because that's that higher level DOK, that's that higher level work that we're thinking of. And how many of you immediately notice that underneath what it tells us are the wonderful teacher prompts there and how we can go there. So if we find that a lot of our prompts says what is, who was, what's happened, can you retell, then we've got to start adding more of the, what makes you say that? How did you come up with this? What, if anything, confuses you? What evidence can you cite to make that claim? And how would you convince others of your point of view? So we've got to make sure we're moving through all of those. Okay, so how many of you have dog-eared and you're like, oh, yes, 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 this is a huge page to get to. The other thing is the level of text matters, and this is a huge point that the authors talk about. When it comes to strategies, if we begin teaching strategies by using a single text, followed by the students applying them to the appropriate text at their level, we've really got to make sure, because if the text is too difficult, then they can't apply the strategy. But also the reverse matters. If the text is too easy, there's no need for them to apply the strategy. So that's why the text has to be at the right level, depending on how we're using it. So that way they will actually need to use a strategy. Does that make sense? And it's, again, it's a simple concept, but it's really important, because sometimes with striving readers, we're using text that's either way too hard, so they don't even know how to begin to use a strategy, or the text is way too simple, and there's no need for them to apply the strategy at all, okay? So all of this comes around to the final is how we get kids to read voluminously. And this is a critical piece, and I know Pam Allen's going to be talking a lot about this tomorrow, but what I just want to hit on is Steph Harvey says the new intervention is actually volume reading. And if you come back, she says striving readers aren't inexperienced readers, they are inexperienced readers that just haven't read enough. So when we think about, and Pam Allen will talk about the research on voluminous reading, how important it is to make sure we give kids access. And I want to end on just this kind of image gallery, if you will, and how important it is to give kids access to interesting text. Because if we think about it, do we define interesting different than our kids? It goes back to baiting the fish, baiting the hook for the fish rather than the fisherman. So think about access to interesting text. Now, how many of you would see this as, wow, that's a lot of books in this classroom library, right? But how many of you also see this, a lot of striving readers in your room would go, oh my gosh, no way. Because there's no way they would know how to select books by level and by interest at all, versus looking at these classroom libraries at various levels. at the primary level. Part of the books are level, part of the books are by interest. Here's another one. You see pictures on the bins, easy access for the kids, not to mention Clifford's up there. And we see pictures as visual support as they choose topics. Now, this is a second grade teacher. We call her the Martha Stewart of Classroom Library. But think about it. All the covers of the books are out. Kids can see and make great choices. This is a fourth grade classroom. Yes, she still used stuffed animals as reading buddies, and they loved it. And I love this fifth grade teacher, how she pulled out favorites. Think about how supportive that is for striving readers. And I know a lot of you probably already do this. And not just breaking down in the bins, that these are the series that kids love in this bin. This is a 8th grade teacher's classroom library. She didn't have a lot of room, so she had to build up. But when her kids, she had them help sort the books, and they chose the labels and how to name to get kids interested. So it wasn't just books about science, it's bizarre science. And I love this. I know. A bunch of guys were sorting these books and said, okay, these are chick problems. Can we make it that? And I'm like, okay, but what would the opposite be? So they're like, well, all right. So they came up with dude problems, okay? Now, how many of you thinking those were very popular bins of books, okay? We baited the hook with what they like and let them sort and label the books. This is a 10th grade classroom library, okay? All books, covers out. Everywhere they see the covers to better select the books. And so as we think about getting kids to read voluminously, and again, I know Pan Allen's going to talk a lot more about this, we have to think about and make sure our classroom libraries are meeting the needs of the kids that we have, but also the kids and the readers we want them to be by the end of the year. It's got to be a collection of both, okay? So I will finish up with this slide up there if you want to take a picture of what kind of denotes as that research says in a classroom library. And just remind you how important it is, the role that you play in all of these areas of making sure that all your thrivers, so your striving are thrivers, and that we know that even our thrivers are striving in some areas to meet their needs. And on behalf of Mary Kay Carlo, your senior account executive that's local, and your Scholastic team that some of you will be working with the next couple of days, we appreciate the work you do. Just the fact that you're here the day after the holiday weekend in mass numbers is very amazing and very encouraging. And the work you do is very critical. So thank you all, and is coming back up. I'll turn it over and hope you guys have a great couple of days.